Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and if you ask most Americans how they feel about the 2016 presidential election, you most often get one of two reactions, or both. People were unhappy with both candidates, and they're just happy the election, which seemed to go on forever and seemed particularly contentious, that it's finally over. And then there's Donald Trump. For many, and for many Jews, most of whom are lifelong Democrats, the fact that Donald Trump won what was, to almost everyone, an upset, surprise victory, has been a source of pain and concern of enormous proportions. It's as if Donald Trump's election has proven that America is now a dark, evil, racist society. And Donald Trump threatens to bring the entire planet to the brink of disaster. Then for many others, including many bright, thoughtful, caring Jews, even Jews who voted for Barack Obama twice, the election of Donald Trump is no disaster at all, but represents a breath of fresh air, a corrective to a social pendulum that swung much too far to the left, and promises a U.S. administration that will have a saner and sounder foreign policy and be much more diplomatically harmonious with the State of Israel. So while the anti-Trump group is sitting shiva, the pro-Trump group is celebrating a simcha. Each of you watching L'Chaim on JBS right now, each of you has your own take on the election of Donald Trump as the 45th president of the United States. One of the reasons virtually everyone was so surprised by Donald Trump's victory was because we had all been snookered by a mainstream media, print and television, informing us that Donald Trump had no path to 270 electoral votes, and assuring us that Donald Trump was intellectually, emotionally, and politically incapable of being President of the United States. If you're a regular viewer of JBS, you know we responsibly took no sides in this past election, neither for Hillary Clinton nor for Donald Trump. We did, however, try to be as honest as possible when discussing the attacks and often ludicrously unfair criticisms that became a staple of the mainstream media, which tragically for America proved to be flagrantly biased, unabashedly dishonest, and which solidified its reputation throughout America of being inconsequential in the thinking of the American people. The position we took here on JBS earned me personally angry emails and letters from the left, which felt I was being far too soft on Donald Trump, and from the right, who felt I was being far too hard on Donald Trump. No viewer knows how I voted in this presidential election. And I believe that's how it should be with anyone who anchors political news on television. And I am flattered that each side thought I was on the other. But now the election is over, and Donald Trump is president-elect. And as we sit at this table today, he is in the process of rounding out the team that will be governing and guiding the United States of America for the next 4 years. And in this context, we thought it would be interesting to hear from a prominent member of the Jewish community who supported Donald Trump for president to hear why he supported Mr. Trump and how he answers for himself the criticisms of a Trump presidency. And I warn you now, if you want me to be hard or soft with our guest on this edition of L'chaim, you should find something else to watch right now. I'm interested in engaging in conversation with someone who's willing to talk about the tough issues surrounding Donald Trump and to speak to the way in which the media handled the 2016 presidential election, which is why I'm so pleased to be joined by Kenneth S. Abramowitz, co-founder and managing general partner of NGN Capital, a $450 million worldwide healthcare venture capital fund. Ken is also the founder and president of SaveTheWest.com, which seeks to save Western civilization through economic growth, military strength, and maintaining and strengthening our cultural values. And Ken Abramowitz, who's on the Jewish right, is a major figure among Jewish Republicans, and during the 2016 election was an ardent supporter of Donald Trump. And Ken, it's wonderful to have you at this table. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Talk to me a moment about who you are. You're a Jewish kid who grew up where?
I grew up in Boston and went to high school in Connecticut.
Where in Connecticut?
Taft School in Watertown, Connecticut. Boarding school. I went there for 4 years.
Yep.
And I went to Columbia University undergraduate. I majored in chemistry, and then I went to Harvard Business School.
You know, Columbia is a very liberal place. Were you liberal as a college student, or were you leaning as you lean now to the right even then?
Yeah. No, I was like most college students. I was liberal then, but I'm normal now. I've recovered.
I see. It's liberal or normal, not liberal or right.
Yes, that's the way I look at it. Actually, I regard myself as a centrist, a rational centrist, and everybody else is on the left.
Okay.
So those are the only two, those are the terminologies I recognize.
I mean this seriously. Do you feel lonely at times?
Well, no, I'm surrounded by the other third of the population who's normal. The way I calculate things, since I'm a quantitative person, I look at a third of the people are what I call rational centrists, and that means we believe in a strong economy, strong culture, strong military defense.
And the center does not?
That's what I.
That's
what I call the center.
And the left does not?
Right. The left does not believe in a strong economy, does not believe in our culture, does not believe in a strong defense. So that would be my number one disagreement between what I call rational centrists,
yes,
1/3 of the population, and the other 2/3 of the population.
Okay. And you've given this thought, why are 2/3 of America to the left and not what you call rational centrist?
Well, 2/3 of the people are to the left. Of the way I look at them, they believe in false narratives. And one of the lessons I've learned in history is most of the people believe in false narratives most of the time.
Because?
Because it's more comfortable to believe in false narratives.
Give me an example of one false narrative.
The isolationists, the oceans will protect us. The mountains and the prairies will protect us. We don't have to defend ourselves. Fortunately, we live in a country where oceans are on both sides and we are safe. That would be a false narrative.
You know, what one hears now in the media is the right, or the group that Donald Trump represents, they're the ones who want to be isolationist. And the liberals are the ones who are arguing that America should be involved in the world. So I don't understand.
That would be a false narrative.
Which part?
Both.
You don't think those on the left want America to be involved with the world as a whole? They also want America what?
Let's go back to the three big issues, because I measure candidates on these three issues. Whenever a candidate speaks, either directly to me or in the newspaper or TV, I grade them. I pretend I'm a professor and I grade them on the three issues. So, for example, Mr. Trump, for the three big issues, grow the economy, protect our culture, protect us physically, I would have given him a B, a B, and a B.
Only a B.
Yes, but with the potential for an A. But during most of the campaign, by the way, he grew during the campaign. So I'd say he went from a C to a B and was on his way to an A. But then the election took place, and so I'd give him a B. Hillary started as an F, an F, and an F, and was failing at those three issues. And she remained faithful and failed every single day during the election until November 8th. So we had an F candidate versus a B candidate. I would have preferred an A candidate, but anyways, B beat the F.
Okay. What do you mean when you say the left doesn't want a strong economy?
Right.
Because doesn't everybody want a strong economy?
You would think. Only a third of the people, remember the way I define things, a third of the people are normal. They want a strong economy because that's a normal thing to want.
Okay, well, what does the left want, in your view?
Oh, they want to redistribute property.
But wouldn't they argue that that's how you create a strong economy from their perspective?
Oh, that's what they would say, but they have a false narrative.
Okay. What you're saying is they may think they want a strong economy,
Right.
but you believe their means would prevent that from happening.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
They would say we should have a strong military,
Right.
but their means of achieving it would get in the way of our country really having a strong military.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying.
Yes, right.
Okay, that's very helpful. And so if you were sitting with Hillary Clinton, she would say to you, Ken, of course I want a strong economy, correct?
She would say that.
Okay, but what would she say we should do that you would say, Hillary, if you do that, although you think you're going to have a good economy, you won't? What would she suggest that you would say to her, respectfully, Mrs. Clinton, you're wrong?
She would say, I want higher taxes. She would say, the rich are not paying enough taxes, to which I would respond, 10% of the people pay 70% of the taxes. Excuse me, it's actually not fair that 10% have to pay 70% of the tax. She wants 10% to pay 100% of the taxes. So that's one issue. Second issue, when you tax people who produce and you send the money to the government, who then steals 20% of it, or I won't say steal, it costs them 20% to run the government, and then they hand the 80% back to the people who then consume it. You've taken money away from investment and moved it to consumption. Now, that buys votes, which is why she would want to do that, but it hurts investment, and it hurts jobs, and it hurts future jobs. So therefore, I would say you do not want to raise taxes because you will hurt the growth rate of the economy, and the number one goal of the government should be to foster an environment which allows the economy to grow 3 or 4 or 5, even 5%.
You've heard what I'm about to say a million times, but I want to hear what you would answer. Ken, you're really arguing for a system in which the rich get richer, the middle class sort of stay put, and those who are underclass are going to have more poverty. And that the problem that the Republican always has been unable to confront and respond to is one of the major obligations of government is to care for those who cannot care for themselves. And the Republicans are always criticized for cutting education, cutting health services, and cutting social services that make life possible for people who are good people. It's not that they're just sitting on the sidelines asking for a handout, but the way the system works, those on the upper end, you and I, are going to do very well. But the lower class is going to be really slammed, and Republicans don't care enough about the pain of those at the bottom, you would say.
It's all false. Thank you for your thoughts. It's all a false narrative. You want investment in society. You want new factories. You want new ideas. You want the next Google, the next Apple. And when those next gets created, it creates first this many jobs and then eventually a lot of jobs. And so I would argue that it's unfortunate fact of life that the people with ideas make more money than the people without ideas. All right, there is a reason why Bill Gates has roughly $50 billion more than you and I have, okay? Because he created Microsoft.
Right.
We didn't, okay? And similarly for the inventors of many of the other wonderful innovations that we have. But God bless them. God bless Microsoft. God bless Apple and Google for creating the innovations that they did. And yes, the people who created those innovations made a lot of money. Great. But remember, they have to pay the same 30-40% taxes that other people have in the higher brackets. They have to pay the same 30% capital gains taxes on the stock that they might own, and maybe they sell it. And so the society benefits first from the job creation, and then secondly by taxing them the 30-40% or the capital gains tax rate, and then that money goes to fuel all the problems that don't get addressed by the job creators that you highlighted.
Social services.
Yeah, the various, and in particular, the key subsidies in this country go to Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid would be the three biggest
recipients.
Yeah, recipients. I mean, they're all forms of welfare. People don't look at them as all forms of welfare, but they're all subsidy programs, and which creates a safety net, which I think is fine. I'm not anti-safety net, and by the way, they're all elements of socialism, and most Americans accept the concept of having a Medicare, a Social Security, and a Medicaid. What Republicans would disagree is how to run those programs, but they wouldn't disagree with those programs.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what about the notion that now that the Republicans control the White House and both houses of Congress,
Baruch Hashem,
social services are going to be cut, education is going to be cut, and other needs throughout the country, people are going to, I hear this all the time, you must hear it also, especially from socially conscious Jews. The reason why they're so upset is they're telling me we're going to see slashes in programs, in housing, in welfare, in healthcare. We're going to see slashes. They're going to hurt the average lower class individual. I want you to speak to that.
Okay. Your question involves really two separate issues, so we'll address both issues. One is, should we spend less on different programs? President-elect Trump has said, I'm not touching Medicare, I'm not touching Social Security. So whether he should or not is a separate issue, but that's what he's publicly said. On Medicaid, people around him have particularly in the Congress, have said we should block grant the Medicaid money to the states. Let the states innovate or not innovate or modify the programs to the that fit their state. Let's have 50 laboratories as opposed to one imposed laboratory on the country.
Good idea or bad idea?
That's a good idea.
Because?
Well, it's good for a variety of reasons. One is that the Constitution says that the state should play the primary role in governing the people. Over the years, the role of the federal government's gone way, way up, and the role of states has gone down. So this would be, and as you know, life is like pendulum, so it's time for the pendulum to move back to the states. Because I'd rather have 50 states creating 50 programs that are basically modeled after the same program, but with little bells and whistles and nuances that fit the will of the people of that state. I think that's good. I don't think that even the smartest, best-intentioned people sitting in Washington should be designing healthcare systems or anything else for 320 million people all around the country. I think the states are the best way to do that. Secondly, when you have 50 states innovate, some are going to innovate well and some are going to innovate poorly. And when and over time, states will emulate the states that innovate intelligently.
Has that been the history? You know, I lived through the era of the civil rights movement. And the reason why we moved away from states' rights to a larger umbrella federal rights is we saw states that were practicing injustice, and a federal government had to stop it. And from the days of Franklin Roosevelt on, the notion was a strong federal government could impose justice in situations where individual states might not be as willing to protect their entire population as other states. What do you say to that?
Well, it depends. I mean, we've gone through issues like this, civil rights. There's also issues of same-sex marriages. Abortion still is an issue, but was a bigger issue in years past. And this is a debate we have all the time. But going to the civil rights issue, I agree with you on the civil rights issue. There's a certain way Americans should behave. And we couldn't wait for 50 laboratories to debate how people should behave with each other. And the federal government basically imposed a vision on the population. I think the federal government was correct in doing that. And but I'm just saying, in general,
yes,
I would say that's the exception. In other words, that was such an exceptional issue, the federal government had to do it. But I'm just saying, on the normal course of events, when impossible, move the power down to the states, and then on an exception basis, when you say states can't handle this, then you move it to the federal government.
You mentioned abortion. There are many people who are saying to me, oh my goodness, Donald Trump is now going to appoint the swing justice, and if Justice Bader retires, he's going to have another appointment to make. And as a result, the Supreme Court is going to lean not simply 5-4 to the right, it's going to lean 6-3 to the right. And Roe v. Wade is in danger. I respond, Roe v. Wade is so much part of American psychology, philosophy. Roe v. Wade is not in danger. I don't care how many right-leaning justices there are. And then I'm answered, you may be right about Roe v. Wade, but if abortion is turned back to the states, each state might impose such draconian measures preventing a woman from easily getting an abortion, so that if you live in Massachusetts, getting an abortion may be very easy. If you live in Mississippi, you live in Texas, it might be near impossible. And therefore they argue with me that the best thing is to have a federal blanket on a matter like abortion. Is abortion in your mind equivalent to civil rights, where you would say yes, on abortion issues it should be federal, not state?
Sure. Well, another way of rephrasing it, is this an example of an exception, like civil rights, that it's so important that the federal government should have made should make a decision for everybody? By the way, the same issue comes with same-sex marriage. In general, I try to stay away from what I call these can of worms issues, because remember, I try to focus on what I call the three big issues. And so I would say, I would echo what you had said. I mean, at the time, if I were focused on this issue when Roe v. Wade came about, I guess I probably would have said that the state should do it, or the same-sex marriages, the state should do it. But the federal government's already spoken. The Supreme Court's spoken. To me, it's ancient history, and I try to focus on the future, not fighting battles on the past.
Okay, but I feel like you're ducking the issue. You're a very bright guy. You have a thought here. Does it upset you that if we give abortion back to the states to determine, that certain states will make it very difficult? They won't take abortion away. They'll just make it so difficult, it will be tantamount to making it impossible for women to get an abortion in certain states.
I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know who's going to be on the Supreme Court. I'm going to guess the answer for you, even if there are more and more what I call centrists put onto the Supreme Court, that the Supreme Court does not want to revisit history. That, as you said, the people have spoken, the Supreme Court's spoken, it's now accepted by and large on these issues, with the Supreme Court leading the way, by the way. And so I don't think Supreme Court wants to revisit history. The only thing I could see revisiting is the issue of late-term abortions, where the newspapers tell me 80% of the people think that if a baby's 8 months and 3 weeks old, you shouldn't abort that baby. So I can see that issue coming about.
As a states' rights issue.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And the other issue was this the bathroom issue, which basically the federal government imposing on people. This was against the consensus. I mean, most people think that there's men here and there's women here. And so I could see the Supreme Court preventing the government from doing something that's anti-logic, so to speak. But those are social issues. In general, I try to stay away from social issues because I don't pretend to be an expert in social issues. I'm just a citizen like everybody else. But the issues that I do spend time on, I regard myself as an expert, and that is how do you grow an economy, how do you protect the culture, and how do you protect people physically. To me, those are the three pillars.
Bowie, that's not what you said before. You said it was economy, military, and Western civilization.
Well, saving our culture.
Culture, by the way, brings you to these kinds of issues.
Right.
And I was going to ask you, one of the criticisms you hear all the time of Trump is that inherent in what he is saying is a racist bias, a racist towards whites. And I was recently speaking to somebody, again, a very bright, caring person, and I said to them, if somebody were to say to me, what comes first to me? I would say my family comes first. If somebody says, what do you want to be first to the state of Israel? What would you like to see Israelis care about most? I think Israelis should care most about the state of Israel, the well-being, future, survival of the state of Israel. And I don't understand, Ken, why the same thing does not apply to America. It seems to me sort of axiomatic that Americans would care first about America and then, as has been our tradition, to be enormously caring about people around the world. But when I was talking to this individual, their answer was, Mark, you don't understand. When you hear the phrase, America first, it's not the same as an Israeli would say, Israel first. What it really is a veiled way of saying whites first, that it's a racist statement, that it's a statement that says we're going back to Western culture. And Western culture is white European that morphs into American, and that what Trump is saying by America first, and what you're saying when you care about Western civilization is you really are not talking about a broad spectrum, a quilt of immigrants who come to America and become America of all colors, but that what you and Trump are doing is pushing a white agenda. How would you answer?
It's another false narrative. Remember I said the majority of people believe in false narratives, so that would be a false narrative. If you look at our culture, we have two cultures in America. We have our Constitution Bill of Rights, and we have our Judeo-Christian religious culture. So we have a secular culture, we have a religious culture. Every country has the equivalent of a secular culture and a religious culture, okay? So we're not different than any other country. What I'm saying is these two are the pillars that created the great country that we call United States of America. So therefore, we have to maintain and strengthen those pillars, because it's like in a building. They're holding the building up, okay? So I'd say, to answer your question, America welcomes everybody. It doesn't matter what flavor you are. Everybody can come and be in America, be part of America, if they believe in the Constitution Bill of Rights and Judeo-Christian history, philosophy, tradition.
Boy, I understand the Bill of Rights. I don't understand the Judeo-Christian tradition. Are you saying that if somebody comes into this country who is Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist, and they have nothing against anybody who is Jewish or Christian, But that's not who they are. That's not their tradition.
Right.
And they're willing, and they absolutely embrace the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the American sense of freedom, the American sense of pluralism. At the same time, they are not partial to Judeo-Christian values.
Right.
Are they less welcome in your mind?
No. But think of it this way. Well, yes and no. They must believe in the Constitution Bill of Rights.
That's a given.
That's a given.
It's a given.
Those are the rules.
I want to hear about this Judeo-Christian stuff.
Judeo-Christian, I just think it's an important voluntary element for people to believe it. Now, I was giving a talk the other day, and someone says, well, I'm an atheist. I don't really believe in any religion. Are you telling me I have to believe in Judeo-Christian history, philosophy, tradition? And I said to them, I said, no, you don't have to. But you have to have a substitute for it. For example, I said to them, do you believe in right or wrong? Do you believe in good and evil? They go, of course. I say, that's it, okay? You hit the essence of Judeo-Christian philosophy without ascribing it to it.
I understand what you're saying, but I don't understand why you would want to categorize it then as Judeo-Christian. If you had said to me, and you must have some kind of moral, ethical sensitivity,
Yes.
then you've got me.
Yes.
And so maybe that's what you mean,
Yes,
and
right.
from now on you'll say it that way
Yes.
rather than Judeo-Christian.
I was using Judeo-Christian as a way of saying you have to understand the difference between good and evil, right and wrong.
And I would argue, and by the way, I think there are real problems with Islam. That aside, I believe there are lovely, ethical, moral, religious members of the Islamic faith who, although their details would differ from a Jew's, in general, the sense of right and wrong we share. Mm-hmm. This is not the purpose of this conversation. Okay. I would say to you, if we were out to dinner, there's something much more profound about what it means to say you believe in right and wrong. The issue of right and wrong is not the real issue. The real issue is, how do you define what is right? How do you define what is wrong? And different traditions and different cultures and different religions, they all believe in right and wrong, but what right is and what wrong is differs.
Right.
And I grew up, and I was told it was the Will Herberg model, Protestant, Catholic, Jew. We all believe in good. We just have different rituals. Well, it turns out that was a false narrative. Different religious traditions define what a good person is differently. Everybody believes you should be a good person, but what constitutes a good person differs from tradition to tradition and religion, and in many ways they overlap. But there are subtleties in which they don't, and false narrative or not, one of the things most American Jews don't understand is the uniqueness of how good person is defined by the Jewish tradition as opposed to other traditions. So if we were at dinner, we would do that digression. I don't want to here. Okay. I understand what you're saying now. You want people to come in and be committed to an overall sense of morality and ethical justice, and that in some way they embrace the Constitution, which is epitomized by the Bill of Rights.
Right.
Okay. And if they do that, it doesn't matter what color they are.
Right.
It doesn't matter what religion they are. We agree? Okay.
We agree.
So I ask you, you'll hear people say all the time, well, Donald Trump wouldn't agree with you, Ken. Donald Trump doesn't want Muslims to come into America. And that was one of the criticisms we heard throughout this campaign. Was that a false narrative?
Well, yes and no. The Muslims, I've seen surveys. I don't know if they're true or not, but just guessing. I've seen surveys that 50% of Muslims come to America to be Americans, to accept the Constitution Bill of Rights and the rule of law according to Constitution Bill of Rights, and there's no issue. 40% come in order to convert us to convert the Constitution to Sharia law.
You've seen studies of this.
Yeah, I've seen polls of people, Muslim populations, and this is what was reflected in the poll. And then 10% sympathize with the terror organizations, or what I call political Islam, as opposed to Islam as the religion, Islam as a political movement. So right now, we have no mechanism of understanding, assuming those numbers, just for now, let's just assume those numbers are correct. We have no mechanism to identify which of the 50% of the Muslims that want to join Western civilization, believe in the Constitution, Bill of Rights, still stay Muslims, but basically accept the laws of the land, versus the 40% that want to change the laws of the land from the Constitution, Bill of Rights to Sharia law, versus the 10% who want to do that violently or through political means. And so I'm putting words in Mr. Trump's mouth. Until we can determine who's the 50 and who's the 40 and who's the 10, the answer is we should accept no Muslims from terror-supporting countries until we figure out how to separate the 50 and the 40 and the 10.
Okay, you would be comfortable with that being American policy?
Yes.
Okay. You know, I want you to know, although you say it very well from your perspective, I know there are people watching right now. I've got a very dear friend, Linda, in Seattle. If she's watching this, she's apoplectic now because there's no hard data that backs up your numbers. And it sounds as if you are ready to exclude an entire religious class of people because there is a small minority, and most people would say to you, you're absolutely right that there is a percentage. There's obviously a percentage of fundamentalist extremists in the Islamic community who also believe in terrorism as a means of achieving the caliphate and destroying Western civilization. Destroying Western civilization in a legitimate jihad. There's no question that's true, and anybody who tells us it isn't true, that is a false narrative, and it's somebody who just is politically unwilling to look at reality. But for you to say you number one, believe it's 50%, it sounds like an enormously high number, and that what you're not willing to say, which I think a lot of people want to hear you and Donald Trump say, is, gosh darn it, we'll find a way.
Okay.
And we'll find a way now to make the best decision we can, and if one or two or three slip by, the greater good, which is not to close American doors, the greater good, the constitutional Bill of Rights good, is served by not making a sweeping statement that until we figure it out, 100% is being kept from entering the United States.
Okay, let's step back a little. Islam is a religion and a political movement at the same time.
Correct.
I heard a speaker from who left the Muslim Brotherhood. I believe he converted to Christianity, gives speeches, and I talked to him. I said, what percentage, he said he was an expert on the Quran. I said, what percentage of if you went into the Quran and the related readings, what percent relates to a religion and what to a political movement? He said to me, make it easy on yourself. It's a 20% religion, 80% political movement. My point is, the 20% religion is protected by the Constitution Bill of Rights. The 80% political movement is not protected by the Constitution Bill of Rights. We have to separate the 20 and the 80. Not easy to do, okay? Now, in terms of populations, we have to separate the 50, the 40, and the 10. I regard, there's two forms of terrorism that I monitor and recognize: physical terrorism and intellectual terrorism. So, just to define, physical terrorism is obvious. Someone has a gun or a bomb. Intellectual terrorism is someone says, whatever rules you have here, I want to replace them with my rules. So I think we do not want either the 40% who believe in Sharia law or the 10% who believe in physically imposing Sharia law. I think that that's un-American. And they should be excluded, and we do have to figure out a mechanism to separate the 50, the 40, and the 10. Now let's go back into history. My grandparents came from Lithuania 100 years ago through Ellis Island. Can you imagine if they said to the immigration officer, if they didn't know English, but let's pretend that they knew English, and they said, we're coming here to convert all the Christians to Judaism, and if they don't convert, we're going to kill them. And by the way, we also believe in communism, not capitalism, and we're going to find all the capitalists we can find, and if they don't convert to communism, we're going to kill them. Do you think the immigration would say, we're so happy?
But no one's saying that.
Of course they are.
No one's saying that.
They're either saying it or acting that way.
People who are coming to the United States, Muslims who are coming to the United States, you believe have the equivalent philosophy that you just said. If your grandparents had come and said, of course they would not have been allowed in.
Right.
So what you're saying is there are members of the Islamic community coming to America, and if they told the truth, they would say that to the immigration officer.
I would say, I'm guessing, but I saw some polls, 50% would say I'm Muslim, but I want to join Western civilization. I want to accept the Constitution Bill of Rights. 40% would say the Constitution and Bill of Rights should be replaced by Sharia law, peacefully, but should be replaced. And 10% would say we violently want to impose Sharia law on the country. That is un-American.
Okay. If you are right, it's an interesting case to make. I think at the moment we would need more data to know whether you are right.
Great.
All
So
right.
now you agree. We should delay. Thank you. So now we should delay immigration till we have the more data. I agree with you.
Okay. I want to ask you some specifics now. And you just give me how you answered at the time. And what I said to myself is, I want to know what Ken was saying to himself when he heard all around him all the reasons why you shouldn't have been for Trump. So, one argument, we wouldn't normally elect a man who has absolutely no experience in government. When you hear that argument, forget about anything else having to do with Donald Trump. What do you say that would prompt you to support somebody who's never spent a day in the halls of government?
Okay, first, I'm going to give you a slight bias. I went to business school, and anyone who goes to business school can do anything they want to do.
Okay,
Okay.
a bias. You're honest.
Slight bias, okay? So businessmen are trained to confront problems and solve problems. That's our function in life. And not be politically correct, but there's a problem, fix the problem. And so I think being a professional businessman is great qualifications for Mr. Trump.
So it didn't bother you he had no experience in government?
No.
Okay, number two. During the primaries and during the election, he did not display a real lack of understanding, familiarity, sophistication with some of the major issues that confront America and the world, nor did he indicate any interest in learning. Did that give you any pause?
That did give me some pause. That's not a false narrative. That's a legitimate issue. And one of the problems politicians have, or a businessman becoming a politician, is there's 100 issues you have to have an opinion on. I, for example, I'm not a politician, I'm just a citizen, trying to be a helpful citizen. I have, I'd say, very informed positions on two issues. Healthcare, because I spend 4 days a week on healthcare. I've spent 40 years on healthcare. In national security, which I spend 2 days a week as a public service, as a student, teaching myself about national security. If I were a politician and you asked me an opinion on the other 98 issues, I don't know much more than any other normal citizen knows about those issues. So the challenges he faced is he knew his two issues that he knew something about, and then only knew very little bit of the other 98 issues, just like we would be in that situation. Well, you have to learn. You have to read briefing books like this, like this, like this on 98 issues. He didn't read books like this, like this, like this on 98 issues. So he had a modest understanding of the other 98 issues. That's a legitimate criticism. But as he, and I wish if in the perfect world, he had taken 2 months off and did nothing else but read books like this on 98 issues. But he didn't. And, but as he picks people for the cabinet, as he picks his advisors, and he'll have to learn an awful lot about
And you
those
believe
issues.
he will?
He's a quick study. Look, I wish he knew more coming in.
By the way, let's say most people who run for president, they project the sense that they know. They don't know either. But they have a better sense of things because they're just immersed in it all the time.
Right.
Why don't, what I hear people say is, it doesn't make him a bad man, but it makes it dangerous that you have somebody who, when there's fire after fire after fire, there's nothing for him to lean back on, even if it's this much, let alone this much. Why doesn't it frighten you?
Well, it's a legitimate question, legitimate comment. But I had a joke at the time that pretend Mr. Trump were running against Karl Marx. Would you spend a lot of time looking at this blemish or this fault? No, you'd focus on Karl Marx. So to me, the issue wasn't Mr. Trump, the issue was Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was scary.
Okay. These are the words that I've heard used by the media and by those who tell me Trump is the end of the world. He's a racist, a misogynist, means he doesn't like women, actually hates women. He's a xenophobe, he hates immigrants. A homophobe, he's a bully, he's a demagogue, and he's a narcissist. All of these words I've heard applied to Donald Trump.
Right. I agree with them 100%.
Really?
They all apply to Hillary. You just described Hillary exactly.
Misogynist?
Yes. Everyone that you mentioned.
A racist?
Yes. All of the above.
On what basis do you say that?
Because I divide the world up into good and evil, okay? I'm a very simple person. She's evil. I've noticed evil people project their evil onto somebody else and then accuse them of doing the things that they themselves do. So these were Hillary projections of what Hillary stands for, projected on top of Mr. Trump. So all false narratives relative to Trump, all true narratives relative to Hillary.
Is Trump a racist?
No.
Misogynist?
No, you're describing Hillary.
I understand. Is he a bully?
He's a little bit of an intellectual bully, yes.
By the way, I want to say something to you.
Yeah.
I don't believe any of these words apply to him. None of them apply to him.
Right.
He is who he is, and what happens is he tends to say things. It just like it just comes out of him,
Right.
and it isn't
Filtered.
Politicians learn how to be crafty. He just was, very upfront.
Right.
And I don't believe he hates whites. I don't believe he hates women. I don't believe he hates homosexuals. A bully to me means there's somebody in the playground who makes you do something or he beats you up. That wasn't Trump to me.
No.
By the way, it was to me those on the left who vilified people who supported Trump because they called those who supported Trump terrible names and suggested they would be ostracized. That's a punishment. That's a bully in my mind.
Remember excommunication?
That is correct. I don't find him a demagogue, and I believe he is a narcissist, but no more than every single person who's on the stage.
Or runs for president.
Now,
sure.
assuming none of what they say is true, assuming that, you could say there's a boorish quality to him and a childish quality to him. Do either of those two things worry you?
They bother me slightly. By the way, remember I told you I gave him a B when I was grading on the issues,
Yes.
not personalities, but
Yes.
grading on the issues. Yes, he has some flaws, okay? But the flaws, if you balance the flaws, pretending you're a judge, and you take his flaws versus Hillary's fatal
He wins.
flaws. Yeah,
Okay.
he wins.
Very quickly, talk to me about Steve Bannon and Breitbart, which has got people enormously upset. He's a white supremacist. How do you feel about Bannon being appointed his chief strategist with his connection to Breitbart?
Well, going back to my bias, Bannon went to business school, number one.
Harvard.
And number two, he went to Harvard Business
Right.
School. So it's hard for me to say something bad about Harvard Business School students. And
You can still be a bad guy.
yeah, you
even
still can be.
going-
Yeah, you can be a bad guy.
Is Bannon a bad guy?
Remember, going back to what I said, if a third of the people are what I call rational centrists and 2/3 believe in false narratives, the question is, how do you convince the 2/3 who believe in the false narratives that surround what I call the rational centrists? How do you convince them to become rational centrists? How do you punch through, not physically, I'm using a punch, but metaphorically, how do you punch through false narratives? Well, you need to be a very strong character and to slay dragons, to slay false narratives. And I think that he's a good mouthpiece or a good person to be behind a Mr. Trump, who's also trying to slay false narratives or political correctness, which I regard as an infringement of freedom of speech. And so I'd say he's the type of person that a Mr. Trump can use and does need to punch through. I have no reason to suspect him of being a bad person.
There are many people who are very upset that when David Duke was mentioned, that he did not immediately distance himself and say, I totally repudiate and disavow any white supremacist groups. I wish he had. When that happened, what did you feel?
I would have agreed with you.
Okay.
It should have been instant.
And I wish, I understood why he did it, but I wish he hadn't gone after John McCain.
I agree with you. Also, I was unhappy that he went after George Bush and criticizing his Iraq move. One of the lessons we learned in business is that we call it, and when you watch sports, it's called Monday morning quarterbacking. Quarterback has to make a decision. He's got a half a second to make a decision. It's easy to sit in the living room and say, oh, he should have thrown it to this guy instead of that guy. I don't like second-guessing decision makers. President Bush made the best decision he could under the circumstances that he faced, and I don't want to sit here almost 15 years later and second-guess that. So I agree with you. I didn't like his comments about President Bush.
Right. And again, I think part of that was why he said he was sorry if he hurt anybody. Mm-hmm. And what I've heard people say, and it makes a certain degree of sense to me, he's learning as he goes along. Mm-hmm. And the type of things he said at the very beginning of the campaign, he did not say later. And many of the things that he has said that qualify what he meant is never reported by the mainstream media. And that's my last question for you. How do you feel the media handled the 2016 presidential campaign?
I think the media embarrassed itself, in general, and was obviously, and the WikiLeaks showed this, obviously were joined at the hip with the Democratic Party.
They were in collusion.
Yeah, that's not the role of a media.
Yeah.
You portrayed it very well in your opening monologue. The job of the media is to present issues from each side, like almost like a referee and umpire in a ball game, and let the teams fight with each other, and not join one of the teams, but make sure that people can understand what each team is talking about. And they failed the basic job of journalism, and I'm embarrassed for them. And I wish I could tell you they learned their lesson. We were talking about apologies. I'd love to see the mainstream media apologize to the American people for what it did. And Fox News maintained its what they call fair and balanced. I wish everybody adopted that fair and balanced as you do.
So Donald Trump, you gave him a B. Do you think he'll be a B or better president?
Yeah. Well, let me mention two issues. First, I think he grew during the campaign. I heard early speeches of his, later speeches, and at the very end. The last month, he was wonderful. He was talking about the issues. In fact, I even met him for a minute when we discussed this. And I was at a photo opportunity with him. And he turned around and he said to me, "How are we doing?" I said, "You're doing great when you talk about the issues." And I said, "Grow the economy, protect the culture, protect us physically." He said, "Okay, I got it." The last month, he ran the campaign focused on the issues, not the silly issues, not the what's called rabbit holes, focus on the issues. Whereas in the beginning of the campaign, he was focused on silly issues that weren't presidential. And so I think he grew during the campaign and went from, let's say, a C candidate to a B candidate. If the election were held a month later, he well could have been an A candidate. Hillary was not capable of growing. And so I think when the people saw the gap growing between the two candidates, it caused them to vote for Mr. Trump. I have high hopes that he becomes an A president. He's picking good people around him for the cabinet. That's a good sign. And I'm a little disconcerted by how long it's taking to find a Secretary of State, because he's interviewing some people who are obviously not qualified to be Secretary of State and shouldn't be thought of as Secretary of States because they don't represent America's goodness to the world.
Who bothers you?
Well, Senator Corker.
Does Giuliani bother you?
No, Giuliani could be wonderful. John Bolton's wonderful. And so those don't bother.
Petraeus.
Petraeus is confused.
Romney.
Confused. Look, remember, I got good and evil. We want someone to say, we're good. Here's why we're good. We want you to be good. We don't want someone to say, well, we're sort of good, and sometimes we're not, and I don't know, and I'm confused. We don't need people who are confused. The society is confused enough. We need people who are unabashedly pro-American.
Okay. Ken, I give you enormous credit. You are articulate. You represent a position very well. And there are going to be people who watch this edition of L'Chaim, and they're going to fall in love with you, and there are going to be people who they want to string you up because they think you're out of your mind. And I'm just very grateful that you come here and articulate so well. I hope you'll come back, and periodically we'll sort of review where we stand with Mr. Trump as President of the United States. May I have you back?
It'd be an honor to be back.
Thank you very, very much,
Ken.
Ken. Beautifully done. The thoughts of Ken Abramowitz. He's the co-founder and managing general partner of NGN Capital, and he's the founding president of SaveTheWest.com. And again, as I just said to him, I know some of you will just think he was wonderful, and some of you will think he was terrible. I want to hear it all. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I hope I hear from many of you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.